Welcome to Idea Citizen. Today I'm speaking with Rob Gaedtke. We're talking about his concept on stop managing and start leading. Rob, I did actually look you up. I went on Glassdoor. I was like, let me make sure if I'm speaking to somebody about managing and leadership and leading that they're not completely
That
full
he's
of
not a
shit.
dud.
Yeah. I'm like, that would be the worst thing. Let's be honest. I think that there's this, I don't know, like this false authority or people authoritatively talking on topics and everything just from like a place of ego with like out action. And so when I looked you up, I was like, okay, cool. This tracks. I'm interested in this conversation. Like your team likes you. I'm like, let's do this. At least
Yeah, I'm still struggling as a leader, so yeah, I don't have it figured out.
no, well, hey, you know what? I think saying that alone, just saying that, like, hey, I don't have it all figured out, I think is the start for like a good leader. So, like, let's go from there. Rob, if you could start with just a brief little introduction to yourself and we'll kick this off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rob Gaedtke, husband, father of two pretty decent kids, and president CEO of an advertising marketing firm called KPS3. We're about 50 employees. We do work across the United States, and yeah, about I'd say 10 to 15 of our employees are not housed in Reno. So we're Reno based, but folks all over the place. So, yeah.
You have an interesting background though, because when I was taking a look at you on LinkedIn, like you've kind of come up in the organization. You started, you left, you came back, and I actually initially started thinking about the new CEO of Nike and just how kind of coming up the ranks and maybe less, less specific to KPS3. You're kind of coming up, but I respect it. I really appreciate and like seeing people getting promoted from within. And I think you also have like a unique vantage point from that experience. When you, and I don't have it up on my screen right now, when you were first at KPS3, where did you start and where did you go and how did you come back? And I guess why did you come back?
Yeah. So I started at KPS3 as a production artist, the lowest level of designer that an agency has, and started there for my first gig. I told them I was graduated, but I told a little fib. I hadn't graduated yet, so kind of worked late nights, got things done, and then I believe I left KPS3 about 5 years later as an art director. So I was an art director, and I decided, I want to own a company. I want to actually be a leader of a company. And I knew that unless I had the client side, right? Unless I knew I had the creative side, but I didn't know the client side, that I really couldn't lead the whole company. So I left. Left for about 5 years. Did the account thing, so managed clients for a digital kind of agency. They were a pretty big player in the space. Was flying to Boston way too much, and had a fresh newborn, and ultimately was asked to come back to KPS3 in more of a leadership role, and felt like it was time for me to come back to Reno and come back to KPS3. Yeah, so
Yeah, you've been there now
that was
how
sort of
long?
the in and out. I think if you add them all together, I'm pushing close to 20 years, almost 2 decades. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you know the ins and outs, you know where the bodies are buried. You're like any of like
Yep,
the random
absolutely.
anecdotes, like, oh, do you remember when somebody like, we did this and this for whatever client? You're like, yep, know exactly what you're talking about. And it's
Uh
this
huh.
one and it's here. Go under this folder drive or whatever. So
Exactly.
we're talking about stop managing and start leading. And I think I like to start a lot of these conversations off with ultimately definitions. And one of them that I mean, I created the outline, but one of the ones, well, caveat, I did create the outline with the help of Copilot because why not? So like I'm like
As you should
I
in
don't want to
2024.
misrepresent myself. I mean, at the end of the day, these outlines are. I'm like, hey, make this outline, and then, but ultimately, like, the crux of the conversation, really, in the core of it, is this conversation. But it helps guide it. So I'm like, why not use this? But so let's, if you could define your opinion of managing versus leading, and I guess I wanted to throw into that also just like boss, because I think like we have like a few of these different terminologies that are used, in the nature of this conversation.
Yeah, I use boss and manager equally. I'd say I use boss with a little, I don't know, more sarcasm, right? I hate that term. I think I've had a few reports call me boss, and I'm like, let's turn that off. But because I think they mean the same, right? I think managers, bosses, very transactional driven, right? It's about now. It's about what's in front of us today, and I think leaders much more future forward, right? So they're about what's next, what's what's the longer vision, not only for like company or department or division or whatnot, but for individual, right? So I think that's really the core definition is a manager, somebody that's directing the day-to-day activities of an individual to accomplish a task. And I think a leader is in the business of sort of guiding and molding a vision of the future.
Can people be both?
I think that good leaders know when they have to be managers and then immediately jump out of that. I think managers have a very hard time going the other way, right? It's really hard to be a manager first and a leader, but I think leaders can do both when required.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think for any organization to run properly, you need a little bit of both. I think it's definitely like a different tool, but for scalability and just future vision, yeah, you need to have both. So within the LinkedIn group, within the Idea Citizen LinkedIn group, I have noticed like there is a big consistently leadership keeps coming up. And from my perspective, it's slightly exhaustive. I've mentioned this in a different recording, but sometimes I'm like, oh, here we go again, leadership. I'm like there to me, sometimes leadership is a bit of a dirty word. It feels a little egocentric, but I don't think that's how it's intended. And I do think that like where modern organizations are and kind of the where what work looks like today has changed, and so I think the importance of the true leadership and true leaders is very important, where setting the framework and letting people kind of rise to the occasion. So you've done leadership in your earlier career and today. Have you seen leadership change over time?
Yeah, it's a super lame topic. I hate that I'm drawn so much to it. So I'm with you on that. It always just feels so cringy to be like, oh, leaders talking about leadership. Like the epitome of a good leader is one that's right in the background and just doing what needs to get done. So I'm with you on that part. I think when we look at like what's going on today, there's just the workforce is just so different, right? I think it's very different. I know a lot of generations will say that, but I think like objectively, if you look at sort of what we're producing, how we're producing that, and the sheer, I think, expectation of a worker these days is just different. And so I think because of that, you have to have a new way of thinking about leadership, right? And so I do think that that's why it's coming up so much, because old ways are really dated and not working. There's this huge gap, right? I mean, I've had people who were 65, 70 reporting to me and a 19-year-old, right? And so it's like that is their
And they have to
whole
work together.
worlds apart,
Yeah.
right? Right? Exactly. And you got to inspire them both the same way, right? Or inspire them to do the same thing. So I think that's why it keeps coming up. And, nobody has it dialed. If anybody has it dialed, right, they're lying to you. So I think that like future of much more empathetic, much more encouraging, much more sort of hands off, you figure it out, right? I mean, there's ancient sayings of like, right, teach somebody to fish and they'll eat forever, right? And that's kind of the leader style, I think, that's working nowadays. Cause like the punchline to all of this is business has changed so fast right now, right? Like, I mean, you did an outline with AI and you did not do that a year ago,
No.
right? And so, like, you have to adapt. And the only way you can get folks to adapt that fast, I think, is by taking on this new empowering, let people figure it out, right? More encouraging environment, because there's just no other way to accomplish things that fast.
How, so you're building culture and organization that like encourages that. Gosh, that I feel like that also is kind of hard at the same time, because you're like, yes, you put out an objective. You're like, hey, this is what I want to have happen. And I'm sure, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. In the back of your head, you're like, this is kind of what I'm
Yeah,
imagining. And then
I know how to do it. Yeah,
yeah, like,
totally.
so how do you get away from like being like actually like removing the reins? Because I think, I think what was I'm trying to say, like you can say that you want to give people the reins to do what they want and everything, but then if you already have something in the back of your head, you might as well just tell them what you want. But that also then kind of is demoralizing. So how do you separate yourself from like the task doer to the task requester and actually being open to various different forms of an answer?
Yeah, no, it's a really fun one. I have like, because I'm come from a design background, I have like a very vivid picture of exactly what you're talking about in my head. I had this designer, and we're working on this website, right? And it's like, okay, great. I had the picture in my head though, exactly like you're saying. Like I knew what it should look like. And then he came back with like this wildly different thing that I'm like, well, that was so far from what I thought. But it was beautiful, right? And it still really, really worked. And I share that example because I think that's the key, is to like not make that picture, like not go through those outlines, because who cares if it's done and it's beautiful and it, stuck within your culture and was, they didn't break any rules to get there. Who cares how it's done?
Yeah, one of my canned questions in interviewing in the past when I've been interim CMO at a prior organization, I would ask people, and I feel like it's kind of like also a little cringy, but let's go there anyway. But I'd say, like, I'd ask a scenario of like, hey, if I were to ask you, and I'm getting on a plane, you can't talk to me because apparently now there's no Wi-Fi on this specific plane, but like you can't ask me any questions, but I'm asking you for something, and then I get off the plane, I'm expecting to have it by then. Like, what do you do? And in my head, sometimes the right answer was like, if this person say knows you well enough to know what, like, they know what you're actually asking, they know what you're expecting or what you have potentially in your head, but they actually think that there's a better way to go about it or they have their version of it. My response to that would be like, the right answer in my head was, well, you give me both. You give me what you think I want, and then you give me what you think I need. And
Mm.
I also don't know if that's annoying though, too. So I guess I'd love your take on it.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the puzzle that you're asking. So basically, you're saying I want you to do something, but you cannot ask me any questions. So like you're telling me a task, but there's no questions involved.
Yeah, like I'm assuming in my head that I gave you all the information that you're going to need. Like, and
Okay,
there's not like,
got it.
that there's not like a
It's not ambiguity. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's not just yeah, it's not completely blind. It's not like, hey, make me this ad and you don't even know the client,
The
the
client
client.
or anything. Okay.
You have something to build this off of.
Yeah, I think the answer would be like in that situation, to me, that's all about that confidence and like just build something freaking awesome then, right? Like in your mind, build something that's awesome. And then when you deliver it, if the face is like, what the hell is this? Like just own the heck out of it and like, hey, this was my vision for it. This is what I heard. This is what I did, right? Like and just kind of go all in for it. I think that would probably be my take for how to go if you can't ask any questions.
It sounds like you're I feel like this is also like a good scenario for like a safe environment though too. Like at least in terms of
Hmm.
the like, hey, really like putting forth like the idea that like you feel passionate about. I think building a safe environment is hard. I think it's the goal. I think that, you trust your people like being the goal. I mean, I'm sure you've also gotten things that are wildly different that don't work for that. Like, oh, this doesn't meet the mark. So like,
Garbage.
yeah, I mean, and like, how do you resolve or rectify that like from a teaching place? Because I think ultimately at the end of the day is like you want to use these opportunities as learning or teaching opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think number one, in that scenario, I'd probably say, even if I said don't ask questions, still ask questions. You should always ask questions if you're lost. But in my head, that other piece is like it's a joint learning experience. And I really feel like that's another like key leadership trait versus like a manager, hey, you did this wrong, versus like, hey, I did this wrong too, right? Like we both screwed up in this situation. Like I should have allowed you to ask questions. Why didn't you ask questions? Let's talk through those things together. And so yeah, I think that would be the sort of learning opportunity there is to be the first one to jump in and say, look, I shouldn't have given you this task without allowing you to ask questions. So that won't happen again, right? We'll fix that in the future. But like, why the hell did you draw this? Or whatever, right? Whatever it is. Now let's talk about you.
No, it's interesting. Like I've definitely found myself in those scenarios where I'm like, I'll get something and I'm like, and obviously we're talking a little bit more about managing, but I'll get something and I'll be like, and I'll go reread my request and I'm like, I can
Mm-hmm.
understand why I got that. That I actually understand like where I could have been better in terms of whatever the ask was. And to your point,
Mm-hmm.
creating an environment of like questions for hiring for leaders like and hiring for like for say managers, like do you find is there a different place within an organization for people that are managing versus leading?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily that it's managing. I think people that are on like that sort of manager track, I think inherently they want to be right leaders. I think that's what they're going for. I mean, in reality, you could have 100 leaders at your organization, I think it'd be totally awesome. And again, if leaders are knowing to dip down and actually get into a managerial position when it's needed, I think you can get away with a bunch of leaders. But I do think that there is a very different track for sort of that individual contributor. And I think the makeup of companies today, they really need to allow people to say that, right? A lot of people are like, I don't want to manage somebody. That sounds awful, right? And we have worlds of introverts that are like, no, thank you,
Yeah,
but they're amazing contributors. And I think what's funny is some of the individual contributors can be like amazing coaches, right? They can set the standard that's super high. They can teach people how to do that standard.
right.
They just don't want that sort of leadership managerial path, yet they're like actually doing it. And they're really teaching and growing employees. It's just under the guise of like, yeah, they don't report to me. I don't have to deal with their, emotional state at this point in time. I just do my job. I teach it and I spread it. So I do think that there's very specific tracks that way, and ultimately, a good company needs to have them all.
Yeah, I'm there with you. And a prior colleague actually comes to mind where she was on excellent individual contributor, and it came to her point that point in her career where they're like, oh, okay, hey, now you're going to manage people. She's like, whoa, 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 whoa. I would like buy-in in for this conversation, and no, I don't want to. And
No, I don't.
yeah, it's like, and that's unfortunate because it does feel like I think in that organization that she was a member of, I think there was a cap in terms of salary and everything if she didn't go into the management track. But like the reality is like she provided so much value. And to your point around the coaching part of it, it's like I think that I implore or at least want to encourage any sort of organization to kind of like a little bit like think a little bit outside of the box in terms of like these people because I think it's a missed opportunity because at that point like you're going to lose them if you force this on them. So let's call it like for driving innovation and change or innovation specifically leadership, like what are you looking to from your leaders within your organization or how do you set your agency up for or guess are you guys trying to set yourselves up as a place of innovation, whether that be to serve the client or to serve like internal purposes?
Yeah, I mean, innovation is, I mean, I think it's the pinnacle to any company, right? Like you have to be pushing, you have to be innovating in marketing space, right? Of course, like times that by 10. But I think it does tie super well back into kind of the role of a leader, and that's really to push, right? Like challenging people is like the best leaders. If you think back, right, of like a time in your life when you sort of leveled up or when you kind of became the next level of you, I guarantee it's tied to a stretch, right? Tied to when you were pushed beyond your typical limits. And so I think that's what innovation's all about. It's about pushing people as far as they can go because we want it, right? All high performers, they want to look back and go like, that was awesome. Like that was so fun and that was so cool and it was so hard. So I think that the key in most leadership ways to drive innovation is through challenge, right? Knowing how far to push your folks, without breaking them, obviously, but pushing hard. And yeah, I think that's a huge trait of leadership and of innovation.
Have you guys been with all these tools with AI and just the learnings from AI? And I mean, recently I had a call and we were talking about quantum computing, of which I don't know anything about that. And I'm like, okay, I need to go do some research. I'm like, there's no iota of like speaking intelligently about quantum computing like from me right now. But so like with also the advent of new and emerging technology, like is there like a teaching or learning or like encouragement standpoint, like in turn, like what are you guys doing? Like how are you getting people like kind of tracking like what what's now what's current and what's coming?
Yeah, we actually just came off of our holiday party. What we do is we do a half day of sort of team retreat stuff where we're working on sort of team goals and that. And then the second half of that was AI competition. So basically, we split up into 8 teams. All teams had like somebody that had paid licenses and somebody that had like experience in various ones. And we did a full an ad campaign, do research on this client, 100% using AI. And so I think that's a really fun way to go about like just breaking down the like hurdle of what is it now I have to learn something else and just doing it in like a fun experimental game way, right? We had to design logos and create ads all from AI tools, and I think it's awesome, and I think it's a really important way to do it. It also right? Like lowers the bar for failure. We're turning it in. It's a joke
Yeah.
client, right? So it's like you can screw up, you can fail, and you can do all of that under like the guise of just practice and fun.
Was there
That's one way that was very recent. Yeah.
was there anything you got out of it that was like, oh, we need to start doing this right now?
I would say the best thing, it's like, you know those people and they're like, man, they're a really good Googler, right? And you're like, that's such a dumb term. But at the same time, it's like some people can get to an answer faster on Google than others.
Yeah.
It's just how it is, right? They
Yeah.
know how to talk. And I think that was like vividly apparent on like who knows how to write prompts for AI, and who knows how to do it in a design tool for images, who knows how to do it in a writing tool for GPT, right? Like, and so I think there were immediate takeaways there, in terms of like, whoa, this is like, we need to train that better. And then the other funny one that I came to be, because I was on a team, I like to play too, and so I had never used ChatGPT to make a PowerPoint. I didn't know that it had like the ability to not only like take my writing, but then throw it into a PowerPoint. It's terrible. But that was like just a random learning that was like, I can just tell it to do something in a format and it will do it. So you stupid things that you learn, right?
No, I love it. And can
Yeah.
I actually tell you though, like what I'm also getting from this is, well, A, I didn't know about the PowerPoint functionality either, but like I like one of my favorite things, at least like with integrating AI in any sort of organization is, like let's say if you don't have like your creative partner, right? Like your work wife, your work husband or whatever to like go like,
Hmm.
chat through like concepts. I think it's a really great just like brainstorming tool. It's like, okay. And I always like to say is that even if it's a terrible thing that came out of it at the end of the day, I think that's perfectly fine because I actually think great ideas start off from like terrible places and from terrible
Hmm.
ideas because it's either a in response to sometimes like a bad idea or it is against like in opposition of it. So it's like I think that like I love this practice because ultimately, like, the objective is like, don't edit yourself, just like play and see what comes
Hmm.
over. And I love that you also got the whole part of it, like the teaching component. So now, I mean, it sounds like you're gonna take like whoever were able to like figure out these people that have like these little skill sets, and the funny thing is like they probably don't even realize they're so good at it. It's like they're just like, oh,
Uh-huh.
no big deal. But it's just like when you're say if you know a little bit about like technology, anybody that knows zero about it thinks you know like everything, but if you
Yeah,
know
you're
a
like a
little,
genius. Uh-huh.
yeah, but if you just know a little bit, you realize how much you don't know and you're like, oh gosh, no, 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 don't look at me like the expert.
Hmm.
How are you, okay, so like how are you leading by example, or like maybe even you, or like one of the things I'm kind of curious also to hear from you is like your mentors, like from a leadership standpoint, and like things that like you took for them or adjusted or kind of celebrate or hated, like I mean all of it. Like I think they're, I mean, leaders at the end of the day are people too. So it's like, yes, you have some experience, you have like a title, whatnot, or you just, you've started the company. So by default, it's yours. That doesn't necessarily make a good leader. That doesn't necessarily make a bad leader. But like, are
Hmm.
there certain things that like you make a point of doing on a day-to-day basis to, I mean, the reviews say 96% would recommend KPS3 to a friend on Glassdoor. So like the reviews speak for themselves. So like you're doing something right. So
It's going to sound a little weird, but I would say that one of my favorite phrases that we use is like, I have no secret sauce. Like there's no freaking magic to like this company. So when people leave, I'm like, you can take all of our stuff, right? Minus the financials, you can share anything that we have. And I think that is like its own little secret sauce, not being a secret sauce, right? Like it's
yeah.
just open, right? We're just a bunch of freaking people who are working together trying to build cool stuff and have some fun while we're doing it. And so I think like maybe just sort of downplaying the gravity, just being about like this moment, about this fun, about what we're doing, I think has some power to it. I think it's inviting. I think people enjoy that. Like I know there's flexibility, right? Because it means that we're also not doing anything that's crazy perfect, right? So you can throw ideas in the mix and you can try stuff out and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, I think that's probably a big part of it. You mentioned mentors, and I think a lot of that came from mentors. I've been in a Vistage group. It's like a bunch of peers for like going on 13 years now. Anytime I jump into kind of a new role, I try and like call anybody that'll pick up the phone and be like, hey, how are you a board chair? Like what's the key to being a board chair of this nonprofit? What's the key to being a coach of this little league team, right? Like so I think just trying to kind of soak in what you can and just ask boatloads of questions, I think has also been a really great way for me to gain mentors that, maybe weren't even mentors or would have never been mentors, but just by simply asking, a person a question and learning how they lead, you can sort of take like one tidbit or one little piece of that and kind of put it into who you are as a leader.
In your organization, I assume that you have like a C-suite of some sort. Like, do the various different or like upper management, like, do the various people have like different types of like leadership things that you specifically either honor or look to hire for, or and like what specifically? Like,
I would say like I love diversity, and I love diversity in like the way people do stuff, right? So right, my COO is like super hardcore, very blunt. His leadership style is all about sort of challenge and push, right? Like push buttons, push buttons, push buttons. And that's his vibe and that's his style. And it works. Like it works. We do some rad stuff on the creative and technical side because of like his style of leadership. And then I have another vice president who runs a team who's, a Bernie Brown fan and like very, very different, right? Believes in sort of that style of leadership, and she's amazing, right? And so I think really what I think I find in those people is like how do we take a trait of somebody's that's powerful and then let them like use that to be their style, use that to be their leadership style. We do a sort of personal brand exercise with any of my new sort of reports where we dig into not work Jackie, right? But like who is Jackie as a human? Like what drives Jackie? And then try and build their sort of leadership style from that. And I think it's really fun, right? Because you learn a bunch about somebody, and I don't know, it's just a neat way to look at things.
that. And the nice thing is, well, you don't have to answer this question, but I wonder if they like each other or like working with each other. But I will say, like, no matter what that answer is, I feel like they both can learn something from one another. And let's be honest, like, nothing good really comes from an echo chamber anyway. So, to your point, like, diversity and like how to get to certain things, I think that there is a moment for push and pull and, just different styles. So, I'm tracking when there's like one of these like case studies and success stories, and I'm wondering for stop managing and start leading. So, the topic is stop managing and start leading. Stop managing and start leading. Like, should we stop managing? Like, let's start with like the first part of like that, that sentence. Like, I mean, like, what are you like? Where's your head with that?
100%. I think we should completely, and I work in professional services, right? So I don't think that this pertains to like QA at like a car manufacturing company, right? Like I'm very aware of that, but like in a professional services world where I don't have a single hourly employee, everybody has either a degree or is an expert in their field. And I think if that is your environment, like nobody in that world wants to be managed. Not a single one, right? Like they don't want to tell you why they want PTO. They just want you to approve their freaking PTO request. They don't want you to like, have them have a reason for why they're sick. Like I'm sick. Shut up. Like I'll be in tomorrow. I'll make up my work. And so I do think that sort of concept of the manager in a professional services environment is gone. I think they want support. They want to feel empowered to do stuff. And at the end of the day, they want somebody to say thank you for doing a kick ass job.
Yeah, remove barriers, make it easier, if
Mm-hmm.
anything, to keep moving. And I think that I'm a student of servant leadership. How do you build a culture for exactly what you said? Like, where does that start, and how do you actually execute on that?
Yeah, it's hard. Again, we're in the sort of round three of our evolution of sort of leadership. We just rolled out like a 12-month leadership training with folks, and I think like I say that because I don't think you ever build the culture, right? Like I don't think it's ever done. I think you have to continuously cycle it. You mentioned servant leadership, right? Like that's a big one that's kind of like resurging human centric leadership, whatever the hell you want to call it right now. Like people just want to feel like they're heard, and people want they don't want a dictator, right? I think that's what that means at the end of the day. So like the culture for us is, we call them the 4 T's, and it was built because somebody said something and I liked it, but they said like your culture is defined by what you celebrate and what you tolerate. So, and I wholeheartedly resonated with that. Like it felt so perfect because like what you tolerate is totally what you're allowing, right? So if you tolerate like micromanagement and that management style, it's just going to be bred like through and through. Whereas on the flip side, if you're celebrating somebody for stepping away and having a more junior level person step up and do something amazing, and you celebrate that, like I think that's how you build that culture. You identify what you celebrate, and you try your damnedest to not do the things that you tolerate, right, to keep those at a minimum. And I think that's how you build that culture of sort of leadership and trial and you know, innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that it's got to be tough. That's ultimately my assumption. Yes, it can also be easy, but it's like I think at the end of the day too, it's like I think it goes back to, you know, who you're hiring for, like, and making sure that they're buying off on whatever this is, and then actually like seeing that through. And I anticipate there's probably some people that have come in that I'm like, this doesn't really work for me, or like whether a leader or, you know, somebody a little bit more on the front line. You know, how I guess like if you've realized that like somebody say like doesn't really fit culturally, or like doesn't really kind of espouse kind of these important things for you, like how quickly, or like I assume quickly, like, you know, what do you do there, and like how quickly do you like you're like, hey, we got to change this up.
We did a study. It's on our site. It's less than one, more than five. So most employees at KPS3 will be here less than a year, or they'll be here for longer than 5 years. And I think that's a testament to the culture, right? I mean, we have a very stringent like sort of onboarding period, and we make a call whether they stay or not after 90 days. And we've in the past 2 years we've had two that were before 90 leave, and I think it's hard, but you know, to your point, when you know it's not a fit, you just know it's not a fit, right? It's no harm. Like these are smart, intelligent people, right? And they just don't work with the culture that we've built. And so I think the faster you can get at recognizing that, right, the stronger the culture is. And when you let somebody go before 90 days, and the team is like, yeah, that just wasn't a fit. I think it speaks a lot to the culture, right?
Yeah, yeah, like reinforcing, you're like, we know, we know, we'll do better
Mm-hmm.
at hiring next time. I mean, because like nobody, I mean, let's be real, like nobody wants to have somebody come in and leave at 90 days, just like period. I think
It's so expensive.
yeah,
It's terrible.
the company and the person and everything, it kind of puts them in like,
Oh,
you
it's
know,
horrible.
a challenging situation. So I think that's tough, tough for to everybody. Are you aware of like other like leadership models coming up beyond like kind of some of the ones that we've discussed? Because I it feels like where things are changing, and I think they're like literally changing like
Mm-hmm.
as we go. And I mean, we have no idea what's to come. The
Mm-hmm.
future leaders, like, you know, like what is like future leadership going to look like, and is it even going to look like what we're discussing today?
You know, I do believe so. I think it's exactly what we're talking about today. I think more transparent leaders, you know, servant leaders, more inclusive leadership, right? I think that is a really interesting sort of trend that I've seen before. You know, back to the earlier point about we have a 19-year-old and a 65-year-old come from two different worlds, like truly. And so, you know, having that kind of inclusive environment where, you know, you do want to have reds and blues on your team. You do want to have millennials and, you know, boomers on your team. Like you want that because it's the only way that you're going to innovate in a world so fast today. So I do think that those, you know, the concepts we're talking about now are only going to get sort of emboldened in the future. And I'll say that with one caveat, right? Is like thinking about those questions. I read something that talked about, you know, for years we always knew like people quit their managers, right? Like you don't quit a company, you quit your manager. And somebody did a study, I forget what it was, that said like that dynamic's changing, and that people will stay with a bad manager if they believe in some sort of company. And I think that is the only caveat to this piece, where I do think that the bold and the loud and the like visionary leader, I do think we'll continue to see that at the bigger companies, right? At the bigger ones. I think the more sort of meat of the company section of the of the world will probably still be in the one we're talking about today.
I don't know if we have the same, we probably get different feeds on social and the internet in general. Like,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on generally what this, I guess, the clickbait version of leadership? I mean, I think we hear a lot about like, like, let's be
Stop
honest.
managing, start leading. Yeah, that's a clickbait headline for
Well, that
sure.
is sure, fine. And, I wasn't even referring to this, but I'm like, where my head was actually going was, the amount of stuff I hear about Elon Musk or like see like different things fed on and social media. I'm trying to think who else like it ends up in my feeds often. Honestly, that's the first one that comes to mind. Um,
Hmm.
but like, do you think there is a disconnect between like, I guess, public persona of leadership and like what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis in organizations?
Wholeheartedly. I think I think the short form, that's why I love your podcast, is like, more than 30 minutes, right? Like I think that's like such a testament to like you can get such useless bits of tidbits from a person, and it just is garbage because we know that life isn't that simple, right?
Yeah,
Another phrase that I love is simplicity only comes on the other side of complexity. And I think that that's exactly what we're witnessing, right? Like if you think that you can watch 25, TikToks about Elon and understand who he is, like you're crazy. And if you think you can watch, 100 short blips on leadership and be a leader, like you're nuts, because that's what leadership is. It's about like not doing the same thing. You're the person that the other person needs you to be. That's all you are, right? You're a chameleon, and you gotta adapt to all that stuff, and you can't do that unless you have like deep understandings of lots and lots and lots of different things. So, I think the sort of punchline of all of that is no. I think those are false images, and they're false leadership techniques. And in order to understand them, you have to read the whole book and
yeah,
listen to the whole podcast and do the whole thing.
yeah. Um, like what's changed? Like the leader you started as versus like the leader you are today. Like how have you grown?
Tremendously. Well, I love change. I think it's important for all of us to really know themselves like enough to be like, yeah, I need to change that part of me. So I'd say when I first started, my leadership was all about the best. Right. So, like, it was, let's get my hands dirty. Let's be right in it with you. And we're just going to build this thing. And it doesn't really, like, all the other nuances about working late, or are we being kind, are we being inclusive. I think I was much more about the end goal, right, of being the best. And I think over time that shifted. In my last review that I just had, it sort of clicked in my head, and it was like, it said something about like Rob is open to second place, and it's like, okay, that's super lame. So if my failure is like second place now, like, whoa, I need to change again. So I think that's probably where kind of my transition has gone. It's like from being all about the deliverable and the work to much more open to like, hey, how's the process? Is are people feeling good about this? Are they challenged? Are they invited? Are they those things? So I'd say that's probably the biggest swing from young Rob to moderately young Rob.
I mean, you have a challenging job. I think I am the daughter of a business owner, actually two business owners, but my mom kind of more consistently. And I think like it's a challenge because it's like I think at the end of the day, it's like, yes, you want to be a good leader and support system for your team. And like, there's these two like, and like there's a bottom line. There's also like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like people's salaries need to get paid. It's like, so it's like it's weighing both things. Hopefully hiring, I think, for hiring for the right team, ultimately at the end of the day, business still has to get done. If we want to have income for the holidays or whatever it may be. And I don't know, like it's a tough situation because sometimes you have to be the bad guy as well. So Rob, like you kind of get put in a tough position sometimes, I anticipate, because it's like, yeah, you want to be an excellent leader for like your team and support them in their various different ways that they need to be supportive and remove barriers, whatnot. Bills have got to get paid. People are expecting their paychecks and everything. So like what point, like at what point do you have to maybe not sacrifice leadership, but at what point do you have to just like call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's at the end of the day, right? Like the leader is the burden is on them, right? If they're going to storm the hill and people are going to go down, that's they got to own that. And so I think that part of giving it your all and then knowing when to pull the plug, I think is a huge trait in a modern leader, especially when companies have to pivot and shift, and you lose clients or you gain clients. I think it's just such an important facet that not a lot of people talk about, I think, in the leadership space of like, hey, at the end of the day, you might have to pull the plug, and somebody's going to lose their job, but it's going to be at the sacrifice of the whole, right? And so I think a leader can look at the big pie and go, okay, we have to make these cuts in order to sort of save the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a way to, I mean, do any of that stuff like with respect, and hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully whatever's gotten you to that point, if anything, like you've exhausted all the options and everything, but like nobody wants to get there. Like that is obviously like the last means.
Hmm.
I think there's this expectation nowadays that, people want to know more. And I don't know if this is a generational thing. People that have been listening to this podcast, I've noticed as I've been editing, how I mentioned kind of the generational component often.
Hmm.
I am guessing that I think there's an expectation currently and maybe moving forward, this expectation for like transparency in terms of like what's going on in the organization. How do there's probably certain things you can't tell. So like, how do you go about being transparent or having transparency within leadership?
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest scares and the biggest assets that a leader has right now. And I know for me, transparency has always been just kind of baked into it, right? Like we'll talk about it, like I'll show my desktop, right? I'll show something I'm working on that's half baked. And we share financials every month with the entire company. My review is posted. If anybody wants to read it, you can read the whole thing verbatim,
Wow.
unedited. Business expenses, you want to look at the credit card, go for it. I think all of those things, like people know it. They're not like oblivious to those things. So why not just put it on the table? Because I think what it does is that when it is tight, right, like when COVID hit, or when like when bigger things shift, it's already a part of the fabric. So you're already talking about the good, you're already showing the profits, you're already showing those things. And so I think it's really empowering for somebody to go, hey, Rob's working on sort of being active, like he's drifting. I'm going to call him on that. Or, hey, we've had 2 quarters now that are down. Like, talk about something. Should I try and go get new business here? Or, I think it gives more empowerment to the
Yeah.
staff if you are super open about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that you do that. And I also I forgot to I was going to ask you, like, I love that you get reviewed. Can we talk, like, I love I think that's fan. So like, do you guys also have like a board? Like, do you get like a 360 review, or is it more of like your team
we
reviews?
do have a board. I'm the board chair. My COO and CRO are the other board members. But I do have a third party come. It's actually my Vistage chair, the group that I'm in, peer group, and he comes in and he interviews about 14 people of various levels throughout the company, and yeah, publishes the whole thing.
I love it.
And I think that's just so important, right? Because I can have blind spots. I'm not I'm not perfect. I have plenty of flaws, and so when they're written out, it helps me be accountable for it. And then again, it helps my team say, Rob, you said you're going to work on that. You're not working on that, right? Or whatever it is.
What are you working on right now?
Yeah. So 3 kind of key areas. Number one is, like I mentioned before, about second place is not failure. In fact, second place is a win. So I am working on sort of lowering that failure bar, because I do have pretty high pieces there. So that's number one. The second one is being completely present when I'm in meetings, not being distracted. It's really hard, but that's sort of the second one. And then the third is building out sort of a succession plan for the leadership team. So those are the 3 kind of weaknesses that I had in the review that I'm actively working on.
I mean, Rob, you sound like a great leader. I think the fact that like there's so many things that I've gotten from this conversation in terms of just you're asking the questions, you're putting, you're I guess auditing yourself and putting yourself up to the same vigor as you would anybody else. And the fact that you're actually doing the work, I think this is hard stuff, and I don't think sometimes it can feel critical, but it's like, I think, yeah, sounds like you're like asking the right questions, and it sounds like you've built out like a wonderful organization. Rob, is there anything that you want to leave listeners with? Obviously, would love to encourage people to go follow Rob, and so if you want to share your socials or preferred socials, whatever that might be.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the time. It was super fun to talk to you, Jackie, and I love the topic as trite and lame as it can be. I think if we talk about it in the right way, I think it's a pretty fun topic. Bob Gaedtke with no spaces is pretty much how you can find me anywhere on the internet, and all of them are public and open, just like my reviews. So that's how you find me there. I would say personally, if you want to sort of learn about kind of a personal brand, robandshana.com is my family brand, which I find quite awesome. And then, yeah, I'd say the one thing I'd leave everybody with is throw all this crap out the window, because you're never gonna be in a situation where this stuff is like exact. Oh, I remember. Let's do it this way, right? I think that's the key to leadership is knowing that it's all garbage, and you just gotta go with the situation and put as many tools in your tool belt as you can, and run with it.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Join the Idea Citizen LinkedIn group and share this episode with a friend.